you mentioned tertiary pretensions, and but you always mention tertiary pretensions in relation to money, and I was wondering if you can elaborate on this and if it has any link to, because you talk about negative pretensions, and but you don't really specify. I think what you mean is there are of the three kinds. There are negative primary pretensions, negative secondary pretensions, negative tertiary pretensions. And perhaps, but I'm not so sure because you haven't worked so much on this yet, but perhaps it has to do with something about digital truth? I don't know, maybe it's something totally different. But I would like you to provide, if you can, or if you have, any example of other tertiary pretensions than money, especially given the algorithmic governmentality.
Yeah, okay, thank you. First, there is a negative archepretension, that is death. This is it is not a tertiary pretension, but it is instantiated in each type of not only tertiary pretension, but tertiary retentions. This is what is at stake in Derrida's mal d'archive, archive fever. Actually, a tertiary retention is always a tertiary pretension. If it works, it is always as a pretension, not as a retention. So actually, it's impossible to separate retentions and pretension. A retention without pretension is not a retention. But it is a phase. It is a retentional phase of a process in which you have a pretension. This is clear in Husserl, but this is clear if you read very closely the text, but it's not so explicit. Now, there are tertiary pretensions of all types. A totem is one. All objects of rituals are tertiary pretensions. A cemetery, a temple, etc., etc. So we are living a new kind of tertiary pretension, which are based on computation, calculation. This is what is typical of capitalism. In previous civilizations, before capitalism, a tertiary pretension couldn't be produced by calculation. It was absolutely impossible. It could be a support for calculation, like an abacus, for example, but it was not self-sufficient. It was not only a support of calculation. It was always also a support of a god, for example, or an idea of fetishism, etc. Today, and for the beginning of the 16th century, it has become the main pretension, the main tertiary pretension. And I recommend the reading of a book which is the Three Writings, in which Clarice Ehrenschmidt shows that the use of money, beginning with the 16th century, was a complete transformation of relationship, putting arithmetic in your pocket. And your practice of arithmetic, even if you didn't go to school, was the exchange value. This is a very important analysis of culture of capitalism, and as an anthropic culture.
Thank you very much. I was very interested to see the return of the sort of great triad of the Pensée 68, Nietzsche, Freud, Marx in this thinking. I mean, not exclusively. I mean, Whitehead is a figure that never would have figured there. But I guess what my question is bears on trying to think a little bit about what happens to this triad in the context that you've created. I understand very clearly in what way you would say Marx is thinking about use value and exchange value is utterly pertinent to thinking about.
Is pardon?
Pertinent, valuable for thinking about the present moment.
Okay.
It's the Nietzsche and the Freud that's a little more challenging. I mean, for me, anyways, especially on the theme of money, one certainly might want to draw attention to what Nietzsche has to say in the Genealogy of Morality about Schuld, guilt and debt, as being an important motor in capitalism. But then the other figure, especially when you put so much emphasis on the will, the other figure that seems relevant here is das Übermensch. I mean, this figure of a being to come who, everyone reads as Darwinian, the phase of the transition from the human to something else. And would you accept that das Übermensch is a kind of negentropic device and has nothing to do with Darwin or any of those sorts of questions? Similarly, on the motif of death, the Freudian discussion is very much one of thinking about death as having to do with this compulsion to return, right, to this state of inanimacy, is the expression. Now, inanimacy might also be understood as a negentropic way to get at something like the pre-individual, the trans-individual, something that's part of the formation of a life that precedes it or enables it in some fundamental way. So I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how these figures have undergone this pressure of your reflection in ways that might help us think differently about some of these themes that we're very familiar with in their work.
Thank you very much for these questions, which are absolutely in the core of my concerns. Concerning first Marx, I believe that today, if you reread now, when I say now, it is with informations concerning digital economy, data economy. If you reread, and not on data economy, but what is announced now as total automatization of work in the next 20 years. This is now the new scenario for prospectivists in economy. Maybe it's not a total automatization, but all of them agree that it is certainly 50% of employment lost in America in 10 years. So if you have this in head, and if you reread Grundrisse, and particularly the chapter dedicated to automation, this gives at this absolutely prophetic text a dimension absolutely extraordinary. And I like to recall that in France, we had, in France, that is also with Foucault, Deleuze, Derrida, all those guys, we had no discussion of on this text, because it was, a discussion of Marxism was only with Althusser. And for Althusser, it is a capital, the subject. For me, the capital is a catastrophe. This is when Marx loses completely his philosophical ideas. Now the time is coming to a new reading of Marx. And this is also the time for a new reading of Nietzsche. There was a lot of people trying to make a connection between Marx and Nietzsche during '68 and before, and Freud. But this was overdetermined by Marcuse. And even if I believe that Marcuse is very important, I believe we must not follow Marcuse on these questions, particularly the relationship between Marx and Freud, which overdetermined the relationship to Nietzsche. For finishing with Marx, I believe that now it is the end of salary, that is of employment, and that is of the logic of market of work. as not work but employment precisely. And this is the beginning of work. On this question I disagree with Maurizio Lazzarato. He says it is the end of work. I don't believe that at all. I believe it is a beginning of a new production of value based on individuation. Psychic and collective individuation, because individuation is what produces external positivities, and external positivities are what produces negentropy. So I believe that the new economy will be an economy distributing value with the criteria of negentropy for evaluation, because an economy is a process of evaluation. Translate doesn't say that value will disappear. He says value will be transvaluated. And this is, we are leaving the question of transvaluation. Here the question of Übermensch is obviously extremely complicated and actual. I claim that this is a question of Übermensch, and I believe it is absolutely possible to affirm this Übermensch as, I would not say else, the great else or the big else, I would say better, new care. Because for me, like for Nietzsche or for Canguilhem, even for Derrida, but with Derrida it is a problem. It's not so clear for me. Maybe we could discuss on that. Health is a quasi-cause of illness. And illness is, for me, not for Nietzsche, but is precisely produced, like for Canguilhem, by the artifact, the artifactuality. So here, yes, we must absolutely reread the genealogy of moral. And all these questions of debt, schuld, etc., which are, as you know, supported by the question of artificial memory, that is, of tertiary retention. The first thinker of tertiary retention is Nietzsche, and that is absolutely the stake of nihilism. What is nihilism? Nihilism in Nietzsche, it is the dark side of the pharmacon. And transvaluation is also not to refuse nihilism, as you know. It is to transvaluate it as, I believe, a care, a new kind of care. And concerning Freud, yes, this is the stake of beyond pleasure principle. And this is where I try to make connection with Deleuze, Derrida, and so many people, and where I believe it is possible to articulate Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, Derrida, Deleuze, many other people, even Foucault, as the question of repetition, and a new kind of repetition at the end, in the time of algorithmic governmentality, where the problem is not at all to refuse automatization or to reject algorithm. It is to produce with these types of tertiary tensions infinite speed. That is processes of disautomatization, that is negentropy, individuation, etc.
Yes. It maybe seems strange, but my question was almost the question of John Mowat, so I write the question, and so I reduce to a particular thing, because my question was about Nietzsche as a great thinker of capitalism, but you have already given an answer, an insight, and so my question is how to use Nietzsche not in an individualistic age like the age of Nietzsche, but precisely in a individualistic age, that is our age. Thank you.
When you say that, okay, Nietzsche is a thinker of capitalism, this means for me of computation, that is, of individualization. And we are living today not the development of a new technology of trans-individuation, but a new technology of trans-individuation. And I think this is precisely when I answered the question concerning genealogy of moral. This is what is at stake for Nietzsche. Now, as you know, I know that you know that for me, I affirm that the individualism is my position. And individualism in the sense in which we say Nietzsche is an individualist philosopher. Generally, people say that against, for example, a socialist philosopher. It is clear that for Nietzsche, it works sometimes very often as an opposition. The individual against the crowd, for example. Nevertheless, I believe this is the provocative Nietzsche. And Nietzsche is a thinker of individuation. Even if it's not so clear. And I'm not Nietzschean because I'm not Derridian, as you know, I'm not Stieglerian. So this is not the question. This is what can we do and how can we interpret anew the corpus of Nietzsche as the great thinker of capitalism after Marx. I think here we have to reinterpret completely the question of the individual in the light of biology in Nietzsche and in the light of Barbara Stiegler analysis of this question, which is a very good work.
So we can think the individuation in Nietzsche by thinking the interpretation of Nietzsche. When Nietzsche talk about interpretation, there is individuation.
Yeah. And everybody knows that Nietzsche is a philosopher of interpretation. But we must reinterpret this philosophy of interpretation with Prometheus, Epimetheus, and Hermes. This is not the case for Nietzsche, that's clear. Now, Nietzsche is a thinker of the tragic age. That is, and you know that because I know that you know, because I know that you follow the course on Plato. For me, thinking the tragic is to think Prometheus. The Prometeic, I don't know how to say, Promethean situation of the mortals. So all of this is absolutely coherent. The real question, the real convergence between Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud, and all the other, is the relationship to calculation, which is not at all a rejection of that, but an affirmation of the pharmacology of computation. And the critique of capitalism is there, only there.
Hello.
Yeah?
My question relates to the beginning of your talk, where you mentioned the concept of a new pharmacon and therapeutic prescriptions. And there you referred to care, if I'm not mistaken, or therapeutic care. And I know that elsewhere you have written about love. And if I'm not mistaken, that was in relation to the context, to the role of love in the process of individuation. And I was wondering, what do you see the function of love to be, if any, within the context of therapeutic practices or curative practices?
Thank you for this question. It is a very complicated question to address the word love in a conference of philosophy and not to fall into a Christianic definition of love of peace and love, definition of love, etc., etc. Now, this is a question of philia, or what I call noetic philia. And philotes, that is not only philia, but friendship. And I agree with Jean L'Auxerrois. At the beginning I disagreed with him, and now I agree with him for saying that philia is not the same, is not friendship. Friendship in Greek is philotes. And here I'm not sure that the reading of Derrida, Politique de l'amitié, is absolutely correct for me. Now, this question, if I take it from the point of view of Sirius, if you want, this is a question of transindividuation, love. In this point of view, I am post-Christianic, like Nietzsche, who said I am the new, the inheritor of Christus. I believe that there is no transindividuation without love. Not only friendship and philotes, but love. And I believe that one very important question today is to be capable to understand what makes to fall in love. What are causes of falling in love? Falling in love for somebody, for work, for a country, etc., etc. And here the question is idealization. So the problem is how to think idealization without idealism, without falling into metaphysics, because idealism for me is the same thing as metaphysics. Here the question is care, because I try to define, let's say, not only love, but libido and desire, and the object of desire, that is the object of love, as an object of care. So how to reinvent a new form of care in the context of the infidelity of the milieu that is ours. This is my question, but yes, goodbye. This is the question. Yes, I agree.
I wanted to ask you some elaboration, perhaps, I don't know, between the different terms you put forward. How would you decide, or how would you put computation and individuals on one side, and on the other side, le royaume des fins, infinite speed, bifurcation, and interpretation?
How would you what?
Well, how would you...
What was the verb? I don't remember the verb.
How would you separate these?
Okay.
As if there would not be computation in these.
Okay. I don't separate. There is no end, for example, without computation. There is no reason without understanding, if you will. There is no synthesis without analysis. So it's not separation. It's impossible to separate them. But it is possible to short-circuit. Calculation is capable to short-circuit interpretation, etc.
May I change the verb?
Yeah.
How do evaluate you?
Okay, this is another question. Yeah. Very different. I don't know. No, I try to do that, but this is what is, for me, the main question of pharmacology into organology. Because to evaluate this is to evaluate toxicity. So, and it's not a question of substance. You may never substantialize the toxicity of something. So I like very much to explain that. Some of you know this, but I like to repeat this, that for the anonymous alcoholics, when a new alcoholic arrives and asks the possibility to become a member of the association, the members of the association ask, what do you think of alcohol? And if he says, alcohol destroyed me, they say, you are not ready for coming to see us. And they say, you are ready when he says, alcohol was very good for me, but now it has become bad. I think this is very important, this point of view, which is explained by comment il s'appelle, dans écologie of Bateson, Gregory Bateson. Yeah, thank you.
You are not going to be surprised about my question. The first is a little comment about the fact that I think that we are happy to hear that potential and retentions, it's always to be together, and that there is no possibility to think it separately. The second little point is that I felt like from your talk there is a shift toward thinking light as a pharmacological form of life, and that's very interesting in the sense of a very Bacheladian way, where fire is also a spiritual and magical form of life. And my question, I guess, is about Simondon and Whitehead, so that's why you're not surprised. How do you think together Simondon concretization and Whitehead concretions, and how the phase character of becoming in Simondon enters in discussion, or what is the axiom that you are developing to then go into this continuum of processual creation in Whitehead?
Actually, the convergence, very strong convergence for me between Whitehead and Simondon is not between concrescence and concretization. It is between concrescence and process of individuation. Now I said something about concretization because there is a moment where it is possible to make a link between the two, but it is not. It is my interpretation, and I say we must produce that. It is not actually existing today. Even because there is no question of technology and organology in Whitehead. Whitehead is not a thinker of organology. He is a thinker of incompleteness, and he is a thinker of processuality and of cosmos as a process of transformation. And here he is extremely important because he is a mathematician, he is a philosopher, and he has a point of view extremely capable of to catch together sciences and philosophy within reactivation of questions like theology, etc., which are sometimes for me extremely strange, but it's not a problem. And there is a convergence between Simondon and Whitehead, but not on concretization. Now I believe that I would like, I don't know if I will be capable to do that, but because it's extremely complicated, but I would like to do with Whitehead what I tried to do with Simondon. That is to add in Simondon the question of technical individuation, which is not in Simondon. And I would like to introduce Simondonian question of techniques and technology into Whitehead, which are not into Whitehead today. But the place is there. This is the place of what I said, the unthinkable, the becoming, etc., etc.
That's me. Well, I probably already told you, but you always surprise me. And that's why I'm here.
I like very much to surprise.
The last surprise was an invitation, thinking capitalism through Nietzsche. And my question would be, if he takes seriously Nietzsche, shouldn't we get rid of the way of thinking capitalism as a system, and instead thinking capitalism as a composition of commodification processes? And if it's holds true, this is also a way out for us, because it would mean having a task of producing decommodification processes.
But I don't understand the question, I'm sorry. Can you clarify it a little bit?
In the classical reading of Marx, you were asking for a new reading of Marx. In a classical reading of Marx, in the Capital, capitalism it becomes a system.
You said Nietzsche.
Yeah, I said Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to use Nietzsche. You said we should use Nietzsche to think capitalism. Yeah. And this, to me, would mean to get rid of the idea of capitalism as a system and to think capitalism as a series of processes and a composition of processes. This would mean for us the task of constructing a way out as a construction of processes of decommodification. This is, I don't know if it's clear, but this means that you are no longer dealing with a systematic unity, but a series of processes that are historically determined, but they are historically opened.
I believe we must think capitalism as a cosmic process. And this cosmic process is produced by what I tried to describe as processes of localization, of physics, for example. This is what is at stake into the Grundrisse. It's not formulated like that, but when Marx says capitalism is a concretization of knowledge, this is what is at stake. And if you interpret this with Simondon, you know that for Simondon, the concretization of knowledge into a machine is producing something which is not knowledge, which overcomes knowledge, which is not physics, if you prefer, which needs something new, for him mechanology, and for us organology. Now, Nietzsche is a thinker of such questions. Because for me, Nietzsche is a thinker of individuation, not in the words of Simondon, etc., but when he is so longer analyzing, for example, and criticizing Darwin, it is because he tries to think individuation against the probabilistic apprehension of life, etc., etc., of individual in this sense. So I don't say that it's easy to, and the question is not to, in French, we would say, de plaquer Nietzsche sur le capitalisme ou de plaquer le capitalisme sur Nietzsche. Trace. Yeah. This is not what I say. This is our role, for me, is here to individuate Nietzsche in this. But I believe it's absolutely possible, because if you read Dionysos et la critique de la chair by Barbara Stiegler, she shows very clearly how the control of fluxes, etc., are expressing at the end of the 19th century not a critique, strictly speaking, but an interpretation of capitalism, an interpretation. That's clear that the way in which Nietzsche is a thinker of capitalism is not at all the one of Marx. He is an interpreter. Marx is not an interpreter. An interpret. Excuse me.
So you talk about a negative performativity of negative pretension, I quote you, due in particular to the massacre led by technical individuation subjected to an autodestructive economy. I quote your intervention. That is automatic performance.
Mm-hmm.
No, now I know you. I know you know I work on performance themes. Now, if this kind of performativity is exactly the lack of time, that it's the time of interpretation, how is it possible today think of a pharmacological treatment of this performativity when even creativity, as an example, is something more near to a performance work of this kind of performativity in the time when creativity becomes something that is, I mean, exploited by this performativity. And even dream is in the same way exploited by the performativity of cinema, maybe, as you say. Thanks.
I would say, I would question the possibility to exploit creativity. If it is exploitable, it's not creativity, or it's what is not creative in creativity, which is exploitable. What is creative is not exploitable. This is the reason for which I completely disagree with this discourse on creative capitalism, creative industry. So for me, it's absolutely pure ideology and nothing. And like Lyotard, I use always creativity between. Pardon? Inverted comma. Yeah, because this is a concept which I use it sometimes because, for example, Whitehead uses it very much. Also, Winnicott, and in these cases, it is extremely interesting, but it's absolutely different than exploitable creativity, completely different. For me, creativity is negantropy in a sense, radical sense. Now, how to transform the toxicity of negative performativity into something that we can call creativity or individuation or negantropy. This is the question of what I call practical organology. We have to demonstrate. This is the reason for which, for me, all those concepts we try to do together are dedicated only to a discussion with the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, which is in London, and for which there is a meeting in next spring in London, where I am invited to talk and to discuss with Tim Berners-Lee, and I am preparing this. I am not sure that Tim Berners-Lee will understand what is at stake here, because he's not a philosopher. He doesn't like much continental philosophy. He works with analytic philosophers in America. We met one time two years ago in Lyon already, and it was let's say a friendly meeting, but it's not easy. This is not this question. This is not the question is not my role. The question is, or our role. The question is, we have to affirm reason. What we say here is reasonable. The functioning of 24/7 capitalism is absolutely unreasonable. And everybody knows that it is not reasonable, particularly the the one who speculate and exploit this. They know that very well. This is the reason for which they consume cocaine and so much other things like that. They are the most melancholic people on the earth today, but they live in excitation and adrenaline shooting perpetually, etc. But they are completely silly, and they know that. I say that because sometimes I discuss with some people like that. Now they believe in the negative potential. They believe that they say nothing to do. So you take the money in the time there is money to take. After it will be too late. They are in this absolutely nihilistic attitude. But they suffer of that. They are not enjoyed at all. So I think it is possible to change that. This is our responsibility to demonstrate that there are alternatives, I would say, in Great Britain. And this is the organological question. Today, well, this is something maybe it is important to underline. The pharmacological statement of organology is a toxic organon can always become a positive one, a curative one, and I maintain that. But for me, organology is also to produce organa, to produce new types of pharmaca, not only to use the existing pharmaca. And it is necessary today to change the pharmacon that the web is. And to change the, why the web? Because the web is the access for everybody to the internet. And the internet is the infrastructure of computational capitalism today at the speed of light. And here it is possible to completely change the logic of automatic computation at the speed of light. It is extremely useful to have. I use permanently Google and so many other technologies than we do with, for example, this streaming service now. And the question is not the problem is not calculation, computation, speed, automatism. The problem is our incapacity to think that and to produce reason with that. When I say reason, it is not reason in the sense of metaphysics. It is not the reason in the sense of the unification of the diversity, etc. It is reason as a motive that is a positive pretension, not a negative one, not only a negative one.
May I come back just one moment to the figure of Prometheus? Because in fact you displayed melancholia as a negative figure, whereas in Techniques and Time, Prometheus is the figure of melancholia.
Yeah.
Could you?
Yeah. But melancholia is not a negative figure exactly for me. Melancholia in this movie is for me, maybe I'm wrong, but is a kind of allegory of what was at stake in my communication today. That is the common negative pretension as the new horizon of humankind. This is absolutely new. This never existed before. For example, millenarist prophecy, etc., was not at all negative pretension. It was an apocalyptic pretension. This is completely different. The problem is not apocalypse. Apocalypse is a revelation, as you know. The problem is pure negativity, pure destruction. This is nihilism in the sense of Nietzsche. This is what is nihilism. So we can be careful only if we are melancholic. So I agree with you. For me, melancholia is not at all toxic state. No, it is a possibility of toxicity and curativity. This is anticipation of death. There's a being for death.
Is there Elpis in melancholia?
Yes, yes. Melancholia is a negative Elpis, but it is not only the pure negativity of Elpis. What was at stake today is this. This is a very specific type of melancholia. I am very melancholic myself, so I know what to say.
That concludes the conference. Merci Bernard. Let's give a final applause to everyone.